Marlowe, preparing to leave Patusan, visits the grave of the Dutch Malay woman. In the darkness and silence, he fancies himself the last man on earth and remarks on the forgotten, lost nature of Patusan. Cornelius appears and begins to talk. Marlowe, noting regretfully that he seems to be doomed to be the recipient of confidences, has no choice but to listen. Cornelius tries to justify his treatment of Jim, citing his fear of Raja Lang and his need to play both sides to save himself. Marlowe tells Cornelius that Jim has forgiven him, although Marlowe knows that Cornelius actively hates Jim and that Jim does not trust Cornelius. Cornelius rages at Jim, questioning his intentions toward Patusan, and at Jewel, comparing her to her late mother. He then asks Marlowe to talk to Jim for him. Cornelius wants a monetary gift in exchange for his continued guardianship of the girl after Jim returns home. Astounded at the man's vulgarity, Marlowe informs him that Jim will not be leaving Patusan. Cornelius erupts in a fit of anger and frustration. Marlowe leaves Patusan the next morning. Jim accompanies him down the river to the coast, as they journey by canoe through the very heart of untouched wilderness. They alight at the coastal village, where two of the fishermen ask for an audience with Jim. He and Marlowe take leave of one another. For the first time, Jim speaks of the intense strain he feels at trying to go on forever holding up his end, to feel sure that nothing of his past can come back to spoil his success. Marlowe tells him they will not meet again, unless Jim leaves Patusan. Marlowe departs for his ship, while Jim takes up with the fishermen. Drawing away from shore, Jim's white-clad figure remains visible long after other details have vanished. Marlowe ends his storytelling session here. At this time, he has no further knowledge of Jim, and the story seems destined to remain incomplete. The narrative skips ahead to years, when one of Marlowe's audience receives a packet from Marlowe containing a sheaf of documents. This man, who remains unnamed, is the greatest doubter of Marlowe's take on Jim's story, but he is also the most interested, and the most polemical. He declared that for Jim to dedicate his life to the non-white inhabitants of Patusan was like selling your soul to a brute. The use of triple quotes here is remarkable for its rarity, for the simple reason that it is correct, and because it is uniquely evocative of Conrad's dense, layered narratives. The packet contains a letter from Marlowe explaining that the enclosed papers represent the best he has been able to do in piecing together the rest of Jim's story. It also contains a letter from Jim, in which he continues to try to justify himself and his plans to Marlowe. A very old letter with moral advice from Jim's father, the parson. And a manuscript, written by Marlowe, detailing the rest of Jim's adventures. Marlowe tells the packet's recipient that he affirms nothing of the truth or the meaningfulness of his account, that perhaps Jim's final message is, in fact, in the words that Jim had wished to send to the outside world, nothing. Marlowe's interpretation of Jim shifts dramatically during this section. As he is leaving Patusan, he sees Jim, standing on the beach, as the heart of a vast enigma. In the letter to his friend, however, he declares that Jim is no longer the white speck at the heart of an immense mystery, but of full stature, standing disregarded. With a stern and romantic aspect, but always mute, dark under a cloud. Marlowe's initial evaluation, that Jim stands at the center of an enigma, suggests that the vagueness and difficulty that surround him can be interpreted. After all, mysteries and enigmas have implied solutions, if only one is capable of finding them. If Jim is already of full stature, though, and is merely mute and clouded, then perhaps the vagueness and confusion surrounding him are all there is to know. Jim's story gains a few layers of distance in this section, too, becoming not a direct account but a patchwork put together by Marlowe from different sources. Marlowe is no longer telling the story in person, either. It comes to the nameless reader from a distance, as a written text. No longer can the audience interrogate Marlowe. He's not there. Jim's story becomes more of a fictional construct, more of an attempt to impose meaning on a series of events that may not have any intrinsic meaning. Marlowe tells his friend that it is impossible to see Jim clearly. There shall be no message, he says, unless such as each of us can interpret for himself from the language of facts, that are so often more enigmatic than the craftiest arrangement of words. This statement highlights the doubled confusion in Marlowe's story. Not only is his set of facts vague and open to subjective manipulation, but language that which conveys the facts is also crafty and arranged. This is why Marlowe sends the remainder of Jim's story to the person who has shown the most doubt in the exalted meaning Marlowe ascribes to it. The nameless recipient of Marlowe's package would be the one least likely to find in Jim's story something that's not there. Once again in this section, people approach Marlowe seeking to access Jim. Marlowe is, of course, the sole point of connection between just Jim and Lord Jim, the only person who has contact with him in both his Patna and his Patusan days. Jim may feel secure in his new little world, but the fact that people are constantly turning to Marlowe for information should make him nervous.